Great start to our budget meeting. Let's go ahead and get going. I'm excited. All right, so this is our first formal presentation to the council from our staff recommendation on the budget. What you have presented to you in a large binder, which was delivered to you last week, is a balanced budget from the staff. I'd like to commend Cammie, Rachel, and all the directors and senior managers for the work they've put into this. And so what we'll do is Cammie and I are going to tag team on some of these slides. We'll go through kind of the high-level items here, and then we'll open it up for discussion for mayor and council. If you have questions as we're going along, by all means, feel free to interject between Cammie and I in the major presentation. And then if you have specific questions for department heads, we'll call them forward for their inputs to answer your questions. So next slide, please. So when we sat down, based on the feedback that I believe I had from the mayor and from the council members, these are some of the priorities that we've set as we went forward into the budget. So one of the newer ones on here really is the downtown and Main Street initiatives. And so we have some money set aside inside the budget for those. And I'll give you some specific examples. One of them is under Tom Zeser's Department for Public Works, which is an LED retrofit project. And so right now you've been briefed previously by Dominion Energy about the light poles and the LED retrofit there. That's strictly for the Dominion-owned poles that are throughout the city. But the ornamental poles that are on Georgia and West Avenue and down through Riverside Village, those are city-owned poles and are not covered by that project. And so we wanted to make sure we had the proper lighting throughout the city, the proper level of lighting throughout the city, and we figured this would support downtown as well. So there's a line in the budget under Tom's department for the lighting for downtown and Main Street. So that would be one. There's also a number of other initiatives here within Main Street, and that also includes a set aside within the Capital Projects Fund for amenities, which you all recently approved here at a council meeting. And then we'll also be maintaining our level of support to North Augusta Forward at the $6,000 level for them to work with MASC and other organizations for the Main Street program. So the next thing down there is the bond rating improvement initiatives and tying into the Capital Projects Fund. And so earlier this year, we had a great presentation from Walter Goldsmith and a number of other financial folks that talked about our bond rating, and we took a slight degradation in our municipal bond rating this year. And so the guidance that I believe I received from the council was to put concrete steps into place to rectify that and to restore our bond rating into a place we were starting from. I don't believe that's a one-year goal. That's going to have to be something that we have to have through fiscal discipline over the next several years, but I believe that's attainable. And one of the ways that we do that is reinvesting in the Capital Projects Fund and making sure the majority of those funds are unencumbered, meaning not set aside for specific projects, and so those can be used for future projects as required. The next item we have on here really is for employee compensation and benefits, and I don't have to tell you that we're in a very competitive labor market right now, and we're seeing labor rates rise across both the private sector and public sector. And so as I look at City of Aiken, Aiken County, Columbia County, Georgia, Augusta, Richmond County, all of those municipalities and counties are raising their overall labor rates. And in order for us to stay competitive with that, I believe we're going to have to do the same. Then we also have our line of maintenance of the current facilities, equipment, and infrastructure. And then each of the department heads provided us with their list of what they thought were internal to their departments for their priorities, and some of which were funded and some of which were not. Next slide. And I'll turn this over to Cammie.
Okay, the next few slides are going to be more dollar focused on the intricacies of the budget. We are going to take a high level look over the next few slides at the consolidated budget, the general fund budget from a big picture perspective, and then we'll break into some more detailed pieces of the general fund and the utility operating funds to include sanitation, stormwater, and water and sewer. This slide represents the consolidated budget, so it's made up of your normal operating funds as well as all the other funds. So the sales tax funds, the funds we pay our debt service with, Riverfront Central Core Fund that collects hospitality and accommodations. So the $48 million is representative of the total budget. The first few pieces that represent the operating budget, we'll start with the general fund, and we have an increase of 8.44%. And we're comparing budget to budget numbers, is what we're looking at when we're talking about these percents. This increase is reflective of a COLA, some other personnel changes, and some increased expenditures, and we'll get into more detail on those in a little bit. The stormwater fund has a 1.93% increase. Sanitation, 5.87%. This is reflective of additional customers coming on, as well as our commodity sales have rebounded from where they were previously. The utility funds, around 2% increase, and this is reflective of additional residential customers, but then also reflective of a decrease in Edgefield County, who's one of our major customers that services. The all other funds, 10.9 million. So this number can change year to year depending on capital projects that we budget specifically in the budget, either through the capital projects fund or through tourism related funds. It'll also change with our debt service requirements in these funds. So that number is going to change a little bit more drastically from year to year depending on what we plan to tackle for that budget cycle. Next slide, please. This slide focuses specifically on general fund revenues. Three sources of revenue to the general fund are taxes and licenses and permits. The tax number, 11.12% increase over the budget number from 21. When I ran our current collections are actually expected to exceed our budget for 2021. So I'm currently estimating we will bring in about 8.3 million this year. So when I'm comparing that actual number for 21 to the budgeted number of 22, it's closer to a 5% increase. There are some other pieces with taxes that we can cover in a little more detail when we get to the general fund, but this was a year of reassessment for Aiken County and Edgefield County, and that brings a rollback millage calculation into consideration for us. We'll dive in a little bit more detail on the general fund slide. Licenses and permits of 6.3 million, relatively stable from year to year. There's two pieces of this. There's the permit side, which we've seen an increase in permits over the past year. Construction-related activity is at a high. We anticipate that to continue into 2022. We have a lot of residential properties coming online anticipated for 2022, but you'll also recall the business license component. So when we prepared the 2021 budget, we brought on board the Municipal Association standardization of business licensing, and so there were certain rules we needed to follow. We needed to change our deadlines for when people paid business license. We changed our license year. In accordance with that, we also had to change the classifications of specific businesses. So depending on what type of service they offer or what type of good they sell, they go into a certain classification. We also had to update our rates. So with this transition and standardizing business licenses, cities could not receive a windfall of revenue from business license. So we had to do a balancing of our rates. And we undertook majority of that in the 2021 budget. So the 22 budget is the year where we have to have everything completely done. So we've had all of our data reviewed by the Municipal Association, made sure that our rates that we worked with in 2021 were accurate. We will see a slight decrease in the base rate for our business license customers. So they may have a $5 savings per business license, but the steps we took in 2021 covered us from overall. All the steps we took were in line with what we needed to do. So we will have to repeal our old business license ordinance and do a replacement ordinance in 2022, and it's to adopt the revised standardized ordinance from the Municipal Association. Fines and forfeitures we've maintained at a consistent level from the current year. A portion of these revenues are offset by what we have to remit to the state when we collect for those types of fines. Other sources, you'll see a high increase here, 40%. So that is representative of, we have applied for 2 grant officers, DUI grant officers. We've discussed that a little bit previously, and they would actually come online starting in 2021. But they will carry on through the next few years. So that increase in revenue is reflective of receiving that grant reimbursement for those positions, their vehicle, their uniforms, etc. Service charges, there's a 6% increase here. These are for recreation and tourism related activities. This increase in revenue is also offset by an increase in expense. One thing we really recognized during the COVID pandemic is the impact that not being able to congregate and participate in sports could impact on our budget. So going forward, we've taken a much more conservative approach in budgeting those types of activities to where they actually net zero in our budget. So the revenues are offset by a coordinating expense. So that were something to happen again in the future that would keep us from having these types of activities in the city, that it would not impact our budget like it did with the budget adjustment we did in 2020.
Just a quick question. Under the miscellaneous revenue part of that, I know there's going to be some reimbursement from the arts for planning development projects. Is that the George Abbott? What do we know? What are those projects?
Yes, so the miscellaneous revenue, that next piece with the 28% increase, that is, the increase is primarily driven from the reimbursement from art. So any projects that are listed under the planning department's professional services, there are several plans laid out there, and those are anticipated to have participation from arts. So we've budgeted the expense for those studies as well as the offsetting revenue should arts undertake those projects. And then transfers, this is indicative of transfers in from other funds. So it could be for the enterprise funds, utility fund, sanitation fund, stormwater fund, for their pro rata share of general fund services. So when you look at administration, city council, legal, things like that, they're all paid for from the general fund. So these other funds pay in via transfer to receive a portion of those services. Next slide, please. This is just a graphical picture. We went over the 2021 budget this way when we were in our planning session, just to give a visual on the breakdown of your budget. So it's reflective of taxes and licenses and permits represent about 3/4 of your revenue into the general fund. Next slide, please. This slide is focused on the general fund expenditures. Under general government, we have a 10.33% increase, and this is broken down from the addition of personnel. We have some personnel being added to public works as well as the planning department. Also includes a cost of living increase for all employees. That's going to be impacted in each one of these functional areas. Public safety's increase is reflective of those 2 grant officers being on board for an entire year. The public works department, that's where there's a street laborer planned for that, as well as the LED retrofit that Jim mentioned on the previous slide. And then Parks and Recreation has approximately a 7% increase, and there's a grounds worker position included in there specifically for greenway maintenance. The value of a meal is something to point out to you. It is increased around 14%. It's gone from $107,000 to $123,000. It's indicative of growth in our budget. Next slide, please. And this breaks down our general fund expenditures by purpose. So our top purpose function, if you want to call it that, is personal services. So this includes salaries and all fringe benefits tied to that. Our largest function is public safety. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Clifford to discuss the general fund in more detail.
Thanks, Cammie. You've got a couple of highlights here on the slide, but I'm going to talk a little more in depth on the slide about what we're seeing and what we're projecting here in this budget. So I'll start off with the fact that our current millage is 73.50, and if we do a rollback based on our property tax assessments from Edgefield and Aiken counties, that would roll back to 70.2. What the staff and I are recommending is that we lock in our current millage at 73.5 understanding that that is a de facto increase of the millage of 3.3 mils. And so it is a way for us to be able to lock in some costs that we can capture this way. And I'm going to walk the dog for you all a little bit about, what is that increase by the city? And so it's, what does it buy, and more importantly, what does it not buy? So I'll start with the fact that with this 3.3 mil increase, it's driven by a few things. One, it's driven by overall inflationary costs. And so one of the large cost drivers in our budget is fuel. And so right now, as you look at the fuel prices out there, they're consistently higher than previous years. And so we're budgeting based on advice from a number of organizations for a $3 per gallon for regular fuel and $3.50 a gallon for diesel fuel. Obviously, our public safety officers are running 12-hour shifts, number of vehicles on the road using unleaded, and then our large vehicle, sanitation in particular, in public services are using the diesel. So overall, fuel costs are significantly higher, and that's driving a portion of our budget. The other thing that's going to drive is personnel costs. And so what I've requested here in this budget is a 4% COLA for all employees. There is a lot of different ways to kind of get after that. I know the city of Aiken has gone forward with an increase for just their public safety officers, or at an offset, as did Aiken County Sheriffs. Other municipalities and counties have done it in a slightly different way. And so what I opted to project was a 4% increase overall, because we want to make sure we can retain the folks that we have across all of our departments. And we have a number of openings that are out there. And ultimately, it's a competitive marketplace for the folks that we're dealing with. Archer is an organization that comes in and makes recommendations on compensation, and they had recommended a 5.6% COLA this year. I could not squeeze in a 5.6% COLA and accomplish everything else here in the budget. We have foregone a COLA for several years now, but I believe we're at a time now where that's going to be advisable for our folks. The other thing this pays for in personnel, it pays for some new positions, 3 in particular. One is a planner, and as we see the explosive growth here in the city, we believe we need another planner to be able to assist with a number of different functions here in the planning department. Planners tend to be a little more expensive, and so that would be a mid-year starting July 1st of 2022. We would add a street laborer for Tom Zeser's Public Works Department. They do a lot of work for us, and they are doing a number of things. Obviously, when we have flooding, they're pulling drains. They did a lot of sidewalk this year in the Rapids. I mean, they do a lot of hands-on work here across the city, and this was a request from Public Works, and that's a fairly low-cost item for us because it's a low-wage grade request. So we're going to put that in the budget, and that would be a first-of-the-year start. And lastly, for PRT, I requested a grounds worker too, specifically to assist on the Greenway. We have one maintenance personnel on the Greenway now, and I would tell you, based on the amount of traffic I received from mayor and council about Greenway upkeep, that I don't believe we're able to do all the things that are required and put it at the standard of service that I believe that is expected. So we're going to need to add to that crew. And so that's a way that we can do it. And again, not as high a cost as, say, a planner. And so that's somebody we would add into the first of the year. Other personnel costs would include increasing the firefighter scale. So right now our firefighters are a flat hourly employee, if you will, and by adding them into the wage grade scale, into our grade scale, that gives them a pay bump of about $2 an hour starting off, and then allows them to progress and get up to midpoint and beyond, depending on how many years of service they have here within the city. We would also be promoting 3 employees on grade. A good example of that would be one of our engineers, Brian Malik, who just passed his professional engineering licensure. And so previously Tom Zeser was the only licensed engineer in the city. And so this allows Tom to move duties and responsibilities onto Brian to be able to do more within the engineering department. And that would be a good retention tool for us as well. Also within Public Works, it came to my attention that Tom Zeser's salary is currently entirely out of the stormwater fund. And the problem with that is by paying his salary out of the stormwater fund, that crowds out other money for stormwater projects. So certainly a portion of his salary ought to be paid out of the stormwater fund because that function falls within Public Works, but it shouldn't solely fall within the stormwater fund. And so this would be a move to take a quarter of his salary out of the stormwater fund and move it into the general fund. And I believe long-term we want to put a 50-50 split, half in the general fund, half in the stormwater fund. But this would be a start of moving it in that direction. We also have all of the normal life cycle replacement of our vehicles and equipment, and we've actually asked Public Safety to stretch out the useful life of a few of their vehicles because they had a high spike this year, and so in order not to have a high cost this year and a lower cost next year, to dollar cost average those out and move one more life cycle into 2023, and Public Safety has been able to do that. We're also at maintaining the administrative contingency of $50,000 for unanticipated expenditures. This budget would also maintain our community grants at the 2021 level of support. We've had a number of community grant recipients: North Augusta Forward, the library, Arts Heritage. These are folks we have habitual relationships with, and so we would maintain those levels of support and funding. We would not be taking new funding requests, if you will, from those organizations. We would lock them in at their current rate. And then also within the general fund, we would ultimately want to add mills to the capital projects fund. So as we talked about trying to improve our overall credit rating within the city, we've been skimming along at about 1.5 mills per year most recently. And so ultimately, based on the advice that we had from our planners, our financial planners, to get it to at least 2 and preferably above that, the bulk or the remainder of the mill increase would go into the capital projects fund, going for an additional 1.8 mills into the capital projects fund to get us 3.3 mills in total. And I'll pause for any questions or comments from Mayor and Council.
A quick question. Under the 2021 level of support grant, so is that going to be under the accommodation tax tab, page 78, when it says proposed? Is it the same? Is it 70,000? What is the number? What is that?
I'm going to defer to Cammie.
What is the level 2021 level support?
Or Rachel.
Because there's 2 things on that accommodation summary. There's a advertisement, and I'm asking questions. My first time through this. There's advertisement and promotion percentage, and then there's a tourism related. And from the sheet behind, it looked like funding for 2020 for the grant was around 74,000, which would make sense. So is the proposed going to be 70, or budget was 50?
So that's a separate fund that you're referring to, the accommodations tax fund. That is a fund that recommendations come from the accommodations tax committee that was established by City Council. And so those organizations would submit applications based on tourism-related projects, and it goes through a selection process and comes forth to City Council in the form of a recommendation. So those are not funded out of the general fund. They are funded through a separate fund and through a separate process. The community grants that Mr. Clifford's referring to, those are within the general fund out of the community promotion division, and those are located on page 22 of the general fund.
Thank you.
It will show the amount that the organization requested as well as the amount that was approved in this budget.
Okay.
It's right at the top of the page under contributions.
Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Just trying to understand. That makes sense. And would it be possible just to give an example when we talk about replacement of vehicles and equipment across departments based on a useful life? Is there just an example of what that would be?
Yes, sir. So the vast majority of our vehicles are under what we call the lease purchase program,
Okay.
which is like how most regular people buy their cars. There's a financing option. We're leasing that for a period of time. It's not a lease for lease sake. you own the piece of equipment at the end of that period. So our police vehicles, our Chevy Tahoes that your public safety officers are driving around in, that's an example of a lease purchase vehicle, one of which we would extend one more year, or several that we get one more year out of. But just because we hit a 7-year mark or whatever the time standard is, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to replace that vehicle. So for example, the vehicle that you and I took on a road trip, that was the IT vehicle, that's a 2010. But it's only got 48,000 miles and change. And so there's still useful life left in that vehicle, and we're going to keep stretching that until it becomes apparent that we can't get any more out of that particular vehicle. But we have a number of other vehicles that are high mileage, and those typically fall within the public safety department, although some other departments have some high mileage vehicles as well. And so we do the analysis there to see if those are due to be replaced. And so there's certainly an ideal timeline to replace it, but sometimes we'll stretch out a little bit more just for the benefit of the taxpayer, and also to make sure we're not having large spikes in the budget where we go year to year.
Okay, thank you.
Well, do you replace them according to the mileage on a car or the year, or both?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, normally I know when I came out of my previous assignment, we had either a 5-year or 7-year window on some vehicles. Cammie could probably educate you better than I can on, the vehicle fleet and how that works here. But we have a number of vehicles that are in the 10-year span, but I think within public safety, a lot of it comes down to mileage.
Also, with some of that deferred to 2023 for the fact that you probably can't get them right now, I would assume.
Well, we can still budget for those, Councilman, but
Right.
You're correct in that there are vehicles that we had ordered the previous year that we're still waiting on.
Right. No, I know that was an issue. I mean, you drive by any of the lots. I didn't know if we had somewhere else we could get them, but I assume if the general public can't get them, there's probably no police vehicles out there either.
Chief was almost willing to go for a public support or public safety Yugo if that was going to get him going, but they're pretty tough to come by right now.
He's got a bicycle, got a pedagogue.
Yeah, we could do some
Come
bicycles.
on, Chief.
Yeah, Columbia County does bicycles. Maybe that's what we need to do. Better exercise too. Exercise program, 2 birds with 1 stone.
I'll stay here on the slide. I know because we get the vast majority of the questions on the general fund. So as you are kind of picking through the budget, or for anything that kind of comes to mind, we'll talk this. And then what I'm going to do is, after we're kind of done with the general fund questions, I'll turn it back over to Cammie to talk enterprise funds. And after that, we'll talk through budget calendar.
Well, I think one of the things that I like seeing here is the increase in the capital projects fund. That is a commitment this council needs to continue to do. That's being a good fiduciary, in my opinion, of taxpayers' money as far as putting something down the road. And so I think that is a very positive. So,
Mr. Merritt, also, I didn't say this is not on the slide, but just for the kind of our citizens that are probably watching right now, and also for our council members, this request to lock in the millage at 73.5 mils in no way backstops anything within Riverside Village. This is strictly a general fund budget request, which is to meet the O&M of the operations and maintenance of the city, and what the major cost drivers are, as I've described, have to do with inflationary pressures, have to do with personnel, new personnel requests, and also has to do with the projects that we've listed herein. But ultimately, that's why you have this here, and it does not contribute to any other funds other than the operations of the city on a daily basis. And I'll pause here for any further questions.
No questions, but I'll reiterate, I agree with the mayor. I think continuing to bolster the capital projects fund is important, and I think investing in our personnel is something that I know we've all wanted to do for a while and just haven't had the financial means to do so. So those are important things. I agree, and I'm glad to see those things funded in this budget.
And Jim, this may be a little off topic a little bit, but it does deal with the budget. I know we have several part-time employees. Has there been, and with the competitive market as you've seen, is there a push to get some of these people in full-time in some of the areas?
I think the only area that might be able to talk through that would be PRT, and I don't know if Rachel or Rick wanted to talk through that, but I don't see any other areas right now within the city that we're moving, part-timers into full-time. So I guess the answer is no.
Well, I know from the dealings of some of the departments, and, I don't really want to call them out. We could have a private conversation, but there are some part-time things that we need to, in my opinion, we're going to lose those employees if they stay part-time. We need to try to find a way of the few part-times that we do have here in City Hall to try, we don't want to lose them. We need to try to either that or work them, and I've had this conversation with Rachel before you came on board. We need to, maybe work them in between two departments or something of that nature. I'd like to see that happen because, if we keep, I'm not a big hire someone part-time. That's for, grocery stores in my opinion. But I mean, there are some things, Parks and Rec, I get that. But here in the building, I'd like to see us try to push to have full-time employees because of, vacations. You get people that are out for an extended period, especially in this period of COVID. I mean, we could be really short-handed.
Well, Councilman, I think we're scheduled for a quarterly engagement this week, so I think that'd be a great time to,
Perfect.
if you got something you want to put on the table individual, I'd be happy to take it then.
I'll be glad to.
And Rick did remind me that if you remember a few weeks back, we did a reorganization for the Parks and Recreation Department. By doing that, it opened up new opportunities for folks because we did have folks leave. We did end up hiring a existing part-time individual into a full-time position, which is fantastic. In the Parks Department in particular, there's a need for, permanent part-time individuals. Luckily, I think we are close to full staff in that department, and we're finding very well qualified part-time individuals. Yes, absolutely.
And I would say, if you're working part-time, you probably want to work part-time. I mean, most people want get part-time jobs. That's what they want. Now, Tammy, just for somebody like me, what will and I know, because of the rollback, but we're keeping it at our 73, what would be an increase? Let's say somebody had a $200,000 home, what their tax?
I was prepared for that question, just for you, Ms. Pat.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I also looked at if it also impacts vehicle taxes.
Yeah.
So you can't just consider the home value; it also consider the vehicle value. So we looked at various ranges to calculate what an annual impact to our residents would be. And for a $200,000 property and two vehicles totaling $40,000 in value, it would be a $31 impact for their bills. For a $400,000 home and $80,000 for two vehicles, it would be a $62 impact. So just to show the difference, it is equitable across the value of their properties.
And that is just the city portion, correct?
That's correct.
I know. I just don't want people live streaming to get confused because there is county and city combined in those tax bills.
Yes, this is specifically referring to
Right.
the city portion of the tax bill.
Right.
Now, are we going through each page on the general? I mean,
No,
I
ma'am.
know we've always done that. Is that what we're doing? I know everything's different this year, so.
No, I think as we did it last year, Councilwoman, and I understand last year was a different year just because of we basically did a copy paste of the budget. But ultimately, we wanted to do a high level look for you today to talk about what the budget is going to accomplish and what some of the limitations are. And that was really our intent for this evening's
Okay.
debate.
So
If you'd
we
like to
have-
do a line-by-line review, then we'll,
We have questions on some of the pages. Can we ask those now?
absolutely.
Okay. All right, let me just get back to.
Jim?
Yes, sir.
Are there any rate increases proposed?
There are, and I think Cammie's got that covered in the enterprise fund, which is on the next slide.
There are a few rate increases in the general fund, and those are specifically related to the rentals of our facilities. We want to make sure that we are covering the costs when renting those facilities, so Rick has proposed some changes. We're going to make some modifications to the fee schedule that's currently presented in draft form in the support data section, and we'll make sure you receive a finalized copy of that once we finish that up. But other than that, that's the only increase as far as rates go in the general fund.
Thank you.
And like the Jack-O-Lantern Jubilee, on page 6, under the general that just sits tight then. I mean, we don't, since it's canceled. Huh?
We rebudgeted the festival for 2022, even though it was canceled for 2021. And kind of as we mentioned, when we budgeted that festival, it had a net zero impact to the budget. So
Okay.
we won't have any revenue from the festival this year, but we also won't expend any funds. So no budget impact in the current year.
And a question to Mr. Rick Meyer, please. Do we send out cards to people on their membership at the rec? You know, like your doctor appointment, your membership's expired June. Okay.
So the answer for the folks at home is yes.
Oh, yes. All right, let me just, a few more little questions, not bad.
It looks like the biggest revenue in Parks and Rec is, I didn't realize the concession stands brought in that much, Rick. We need to open one at the soccer field.
Well, now you do have one at soccer field. You've got the little
The
cart.
cart.
Right, yeah. And I wouldn't
Can't
mind
get
having
hot
that
dogs
job.
from it.
And then on page 21, under Justice and Law, now Kelly, indigent defense, what is that? I know what indigent is, but. Mhm.
We're
Just
basically,
right up.
we pay the indigent defense fund in Aiken County,
Oh, okay.
and they provide representation.
Oh, okay.
You know, I did notice that, I think this year, it was, Aiken was doing the same thing. And I think, commencing this coming year, they have hired, I don't know whether they've hired or they've employed somebody on a part-term basis to provide the indigent defense for all of the people in their court. I just happened to see that on the news or something, I'm not sure. Quite frankly, the $14,000 with the level of cases that we have is not a bad price
Yeah,
tag to
yeah.
get that done.
Okay. Now on the, I guess it's community promotions. Did we ever give Augusta money toward their fireworks show? You know, because our citizens enjoy, but I know we have it now at the Green Jackets. I know, do we not do anything to Augusta? Because our citizens do enjoy the fireworks from Augusta, and it's no cost to us.
Miss Pat, previously, yes, that was a line item. Of course, in 2020, there were no fireworks. And then this year, to be frank, we weren't asked to contribute to Augusta. And in lieu of that, we contributed to the Green Jackets.
Yeah, that's fine. I
On
just didn't
that
know. Okay.
evening. It now shows as a line item for the Green Jackets fireworks. I'll say if the Green Jackets choose not to do it, we can certainly support
Use it
Augusta's
for-
show.
okay.
But regardless, the line item is in there for a fireworks show.
Okay.
Fun fact, Jim and I, when we were in our retail training, were introduced to this new program that counts the number of visitors in an area. And in Riverside Village, this year to date, the date that Riverside Village had the most visitors was July 3rd, which was the evening that we supported the fireworks show in Riverside Village with over 10,000 visitors that day.
Okay, good.
Well, you know, there's an old saying, charity begins at home. So I think at
Yeah.
this point,
Well, and that was
let's keep
before.
the money over on our side.
But
to be
that's
honest
before
with
we
you.
really had the green jackets, and because our citizens did enjoy Augusta. We was sort of living off of them there.
That's all right.
Okay. And just trying to keep the river friendly. Okay, now, under the human resources, comp study, what is that? Page 25. Jay, comp study.
Yes, ma'am. What page are you on?
25.
Page 25, that under professional service.
Yes, ma'am. Is the question, what is that?
Yeah, what is?
Sure,
comp?
it's a Archer study, so we do
Oh,
that every
okay.
10 years, but in light of trends, we're trying to speed that up a little bit, not do it every decade, and do it a little more frequently. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
So
All right,
that's
well,
what that
that's
is.
all right.
And that's for all positions to be
Just said
studied.
if you look quick, okay. Now, here I go with my, this one's on page 35, under school guards, because I talked today to Jim and Rachel about we might need school guards at the schools, Hammond Hill, Mossy Creek, North Augusta Dale, North Augusta Middle, PK. And where is that part-time worker at? That school guard? Which school?
Ms. Pat, I think that's public safety, and that would be our lady who's been around forever, who's at Hammond Hills. That's the only part-time position that I have.
Do they still, she's still there? I don't.
She is. She is.
Well, I think, I know we can't do it this year, but I really feel next year, I was telling them North Augusta Middle, it's a nightmare. Because there's 100, those kids literally walk to school in that area. And it's not on one, it's on both sides of the roads, but they're crossing, so, I think with some of your school, and in North Augusta Dale, those kids come out and cross over to East Town, and there's no one there really to. The only thing that worries me is the school does have a employee there, but, if something happened, who's liable with just someone not employed by the city directing that traffic, so.
Is that a difficult position to find? There must be a reason why we haven't been doing it. Is that just budget-wise?
Well, that's the only part-time position that I currently have.
Right.
And to answer your question, yes, sir. It's very difficult to find qualified people to be involved and take that kind of position.
I think that's great. I just think we need more at the schools, not just one school in the city.
Well, would it be possible there, that as another side note, this might be a Tom Zeeser question, because I notice there's no crosswalk right there at North Augusta Middle that I'm aware of. Is it possible to get the DOT to possibly put one with that being a school zone, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, just for school crossings. Because we don't have the budget for, and it's gonna be hard to find exactly, the crossing guard. That lady's been there in Hammond Hills, but I think it'd be hard to find a part-time one.
I think she's about 91, so she's been here a while.
She's there every morning, every afternoon. But maybe that's a solution if you have, if the DOT would approve a crosswalk. I still remember as a kid, matter of fact, my grandmother was a crossing guard at Summerfield Elementary because her house was right there back in the 60s. But maybe that, if we had a crosswalk right there, maybe that could alleviate some of that, or is that
Well-
something DOT would even do, Tom? Okay.
For the audience at home, our engineering public works director said that it's unlikely that DOT would provide a crosswalk at a location that did not have an intersection.
Well, I would like for everybody, if you get a minute, to be over there at 3 o'clock or 10 after 3 at North Augusta Middle and see the number of kids, I'm telling you, crossing that street. Now, as I told Jim, Jim brought to my attention, we do have a resource officer, but she's not up there. She's, you know, you gotta have them up there at school in case a fight breaks out. But, and that's a good time right after school to break out in one. But I tell you, if you get a minute, ride by over there and see the mess. You know, we're parked all the way down to almost the gas station on the corner of 13th, and that much traffic's coming. And I guess people are picking up their children now more than riding buses. I don't know.
You know, one response I made, the question you asked was, who's liable? And this may be kind of a harsh response, but if we are not there, we are not liable. If we have somebody there, we may have liability. So, I mean, when you're thinking
Well, I mean,
about,
we guided Hammond Hills.
yeah, I understand that, and I'm
That's-
saying
You liable.
if the person we have at Hammond Hills,
Yeah.
if there's an issue and a problem, we could have some liability, but I don't think we just have liability
Because we're not there.
related to the school and people getting in and out.
Okay. Well, like I said, it's not, they're safe getting in and out their car. It's all that walking that goes on down there with all those cars and people coming, you know, like from Belvedere. I mean, it's just right over there around 10 after 3 and or 3 and see that. Now, Chief Thomas, on the bulletproof vest, although I know we've always sort of wanted those that everybody got a brand new one at one time. I mean, is that still like we've always done every so many years they shift it out?
Yeah, they do. Yes, ma'am. They have a end of life or shelf life, if you will. But we also apply for the grant that we get every year also from the state. So all our folks, they are on a 5-year cycle, so we pretty much stay on top of that.
Okay, good. I know years ago we were really not on top of it. Okay, and one more question, and I'll hush. Under parks, it says on page 48, seasonal banners, 10,000, no. So does that mean we just keep up our same banners we've had for year after year, or? So no new banners, Rick?
Page 48, you said, Ms. Pat?
Page 48, under parks, number 271.
That's for the purchase of new banners. That would be for the purchase of new banners.
But it said no, so we're not getting,
Correct.
okay. Well, that's all my questions.
Yeah, I think those are good ones, thank you. Those are good ones, thank you.
I notice in 3 different budgets in the general fund, there's money for tree removal, trimming of trees, so to speak. Why isn't that pool of money put in one department instead of spread out over 3 or 4 different departments? Just a question.
So you obviously have a much deeper bench of experience than I do in the city maintenance, but I'll take a stab at it and go. We've got, obviously, for the folks back home, maintenance departments, both in Parks and Recreation and in public services. And so my understanding is that when it comes to tree trimming and those kinds of things, a lot of those requirements fall within public services, really within Roy Kibler's department for maintenance, and they use Roy in a number of different functions to include some of the work on the greenway, not just within the the right-of-ways on the city. And then PRT has some requirements for their maintenance as well that impact the fields. So I know that those are at least 2. I guess I'm missing where the third spot is here for tree removals, or a line that I'm missing.
I think it's in streets would be which is the public services. It's okay, I just asked a question. Okay. So the answer is,
Depends where the tree is.
So the answer is we have that function within multiple departments, and if your question is, are we prepared to consolidate, I would tell you that I have not been able to consider the matter enough to be able to put that in this year's budget.
I think you just leave it where it is. Thank you.
All right, sir. While you're looking through the budget, one last thing I'd like to add, which was not on the slide as well, is the request within the Capital Projects Fund for next year to do an assessment of the roof of the City Hall, specifically over the Arts and Heritage Center. So on any given rainy day, if you go down there, you've got the bucket brigade on the leak problems that we have. Councilman McGee actually gave us some good tips on what to look for. But Tom Zeser's department would like to be able to outsource that to have a group come in and assess where the leakage is coming from, whether that requires a roof replacement or interior drain leakages. But to be able to have somebody come in and do an assessment for us, figure out what that is, and then get that problem addressed so that we can have a Arts and Heritage Center inside our City Hall that's not flood prone.
And you're right, Jim. I stopped by today to speak to my sister-in-law, and one of the workers said, "Come here, Pat." Well, you're right. There were buckets literally all over the floor. Now, one of them was very decorative. It was pretty, but it was buckets, and
It's been that way.
but I don't go in there enough, I guess. But like we said, all that expensive art, and the beauty of it, and then to think we've got buckets sitting around. Well, hey, Chief Thomas said, "Welcome to the party."
That's our bridge plan, Chief. We're going to move public safety over to Arts and Heritage for a little while, and then move you into a facility.
Does each department buy their own buckets, or do we buy them?
All right. If it's permissible for the council, we'll move to the next slide to talk about some of the enterprise funds. I'm sorry,
Are you
Councilman.
going to continue? Does anybody have any questions concerning the new items funded from the capital projects? I mean, everybody seen that as well as?
Not yet.
Are you going to?
I have one question.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you were going to go through that or not.
On the plan, on page 30, under professional services, planning and development, can you give us an update on the 5-notch corridor study, the Georgia Avenue traffic calming and pedestrian?
Well, I'll start, and then I will get in the deep end very quickly and turn it over to Rachel and Tommy. But of the upcoming studies that we have, the Georgia Avenue traffic calming study is our priority study.
Okay.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel and Tommy.
The 5-notch corridor study has not yet commenced. Of the studies listed here, the Georgia Avenue traffic calming and pedestrian access study is the one that has commenced. We are working with SCDOT currently to get everything in line so that we can go out for bid to further this study. That is our priority. The Unified Transportation Plan and the plans related to US 78. There are 2 listed. Neither of those have commenced yet either. The 5-notch corridor study is also a priority for us, as well as a transportation plan. The US 78 plans, and in fact, all of these were considered, or pardon me, included in the budget last year. I think staff was ambitious, and of course we weren't able to get to all of them, but the US 78 plans, they are related to some projects that we have in the capital project sales tax 4. So the idea is to get those studies done ahead of course, spending the money whenever that may come in the future. But to answer your question to date, the Georgia Avenue study is the one that's gotten underway.
Okay.
Are most of those funded by the arts?
Yes, at
Okay.
least some component.
Some point, okay.
And when you say US 78, I'm assuming that's right there at the Fifth Street Bridge, that area?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Go back to my notes here on the capital projects fund. So again, there's a number of things in there, but the highlights that I had from the capital project fund, one was the $50,000 wedge for the evaluation replacement of the roof over the Arts and Heritage Center, as discussed. And then also there is a $20,000 wedge in there for the replacement of the fire panel here in City Hall. So that panel has been faulting at a high rate, and so ultimately we don't want to mess with fire safety here in our building. And based on the recommendation from Tom Zeeser and his team, that's what we're going to end up looking to do here in 2022.
Is the Riverview Park loop, Rick, is that the loop I like, or is that what we call it? Okay, great.
Is the gazebo thing still at Waterworks Park that who gave us that, Sertoma? Is it still there, or is it rotted away? Okay.
The answer is it's still there.
Y'all already got anything else from Ms. Clifford? Y'all want to move on?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Rogan?
We'll go to the next slide, which is enterprise funds, and I'll turn this back over to Cami Hayes, our finance director.
The first fund under enterprise funds, so just real quickly on enterprise funds, these are also referred to as business type activities, and so the expenses should be covered by the rates for the services that these funds provide. For the stormwater fund, that should be a plus 2% increase, not a minus. I just noticed that. And there is no current rate increase anticipated for the stormwater fund for 22, and there are no personnel additions. As Mr. Clifford covered when we were talking about the general fund, we did move a quarter of the director's salary from the stormwater fund to the general fund to free up additional funding for drainage projects, and we're going to continue to evaluate that every year to try to move more of those salaries. For the sanitation fund, we have a 5.85% increase. Also noted for you, we anticipate a 12% increase in our residential customer base, so those are inside city customers that we're talking about. There are 2 rate increases for the sanitation fund. Aiken County, through Three Rivers, there is a $3 per ton increase that has gone into effect mid-year for us in the 21 budget. So in order to offset that, we have a 0.36 cents per cubic yard increase in the sanitation fund for our commercial customers. I did run some analysis on that. So for a customer that has a 4-yard dumpster, these are commercial customers, not residents, that gets picked up twice a month, it's a $10 a month increase for that commercial customer. For the larger dumpsters, so an 8-yard dumpster that gets serviced twice a week, it's a $25 per month increase.
But
for
Tammy,
that
it's
customer.
not us, it's because the increase coming to us that we're having to up.
Yes, ma'am, we are
Not-
passing
not
down
that
that
we're
rate
just
increase
upping.
from the county. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a slight increase for our residential customers, so 17 cents a month for inside city and 26 cents per month for outside city. These increases were driven by the same types of increases that the general fund saw. So our sanitation vehicles run off of fuel, and those increases in fuel are driving some of these rate increases. We have not had a residential rate increase since 2012. So I consider that a fairly reasonable increase in 10 years, especially with we've gone through the national recycling crisis, and we're able to make changes to our recycling and sanitation processes to maintain our rates. And they're still competitive rates for the region for the services that we provide. I did some analysis on a residential customer who takes advantage of all of our services. So someone who gets an extra roll cart So they'll have 2 roll carts and also maybe a yard waste container, and the impact to them is around $3 per year. Yes, ma'am. So not a significant increase for our customers to be able to continue to keep our rates competitive.
Cammie, I don't know if you can answer this. I don't see James here. He'd probably be the one to answer it. But at one time, we could put anything by the street, and with the exception of like dead bodies and tires, and they would pick it up. That stopped. Is that because, I mean, we just don't have the personnel, or because landfills, recycling?
Just the tires.
Well, I mean, you know. Or do you know, or is that a James question?
I would defer to James for more specifics.
I'll
He
try to
could
get in
not
touch.
be here
No,
at
and
this
that's
time.
fine. I have people ask me all the time, and I used to, one of the houses I moved out, I said a bunch of stuff. They pick it up, except for the tires, and but now it's very limited. I know they come by and get cardboard, but I didn't know.
Yeah, my understanding is that they have continued, we continue to pick up a lot more than most companies do that provide sanitation services. There are some additional charges for things like electronics. We added an electronics disposal fee. If there are contractor-related cleanouts and things, we're not going to pick up those services because they're not paying fees for the service. So those are some of the differences you may see, but you can always call extension 4240 if there's
Okay.
anything that remains uncollected
just,
and report that.
I mean, because people like myself, I mean, instead of having to haul stuff to the dump, I would gladly pay,
Mhm.
and if that's something we could do, but I need to check with James on that. Okay.
And I
Yeah,
do,
we still do the dead body.
I do just want to, James isn't just absent this evening. He had something come up, personal related, so he wasn't able to be here tonight.
Are there any additional questions on sanitation? There are no additional personnel were requested for the sanitation fund this year. I'll move into water and wastewater, specifically talking about the gross revenue fund. So this fund is where all the money for these 2 systems come in, so what we charge our customers. And then there are several expense funds. There is the O&M fund for operations and maintenance of water and sewer. There's also the depreciation fund, the contingent fund, the construction fund. When looking at the gross revenue, close to a 1% increase. This will be due to increased residential customer base of 3% for water, and then a 4% increase for residential sewer customers. We are not recommending any rate increases for the system at this time. We do not have any personnel additions to this fund either. One thing to note is the supporting fund transfer. So we continue to remain unable to increase those transfers. You will recall we had completed 2 large projects, and so the previous transfer to the construction fund has been converted to a debt service payment for the raw water storage facility and the water treatment plant. Once those bonds have been completely paid off, we can restore that transfer to the construction fund. And so that's, we had been talking about the ARPA funds coming into play, and that's where if you are to dedicate those towards infrastructure, they kind of come in alongside those funds and can help support infrastructure improvements that the funds can't currently handle on their own. One thing I'll point out, it's mentioned slightly in the budget message, but Edgefield is one of our largest sewer customers, Saluda being one of their largest customers that passes their flow down to us, and Saluda is in receipt of funds to build their own treatment plant for their wastewater, and that is going to remove that flow from coming to our system. So we will save on the expense side, but we are also going to take a hit in revenue. And what we did this budget to start preparing for that flow to come off is we reduced the revenue that we anticipate to receive from Edgefield County, but we maintained a conservative expense number just to be prepared should they give us a drop dead date during 2022. We do not have a date currently, but we wanted to go ahead and build that into the budget so there was no surprise that would come, and we could go ahead and evaluate if any rate modifications were needed with that change. We'll continue to work towards that. James maintains constant communication with Edgefield, and James is also proactively researching other ways for us to maximize the capacity we have at the treatment facility and be able to partner with other utility systems that are smaller than us that we could provide some flow service to. The current treatment facility capacity has all been allocated out, and so there's no additional capacity for these other utility systems to purchase, and we are one of the largest holders of capacity, and we have some additional that we could potentially partner up with some of these smaller systems.
Cammie, would we have a, because I know we just had an increase with whatever, I can't remember the name of the facility down here at on Atomic Road. Didn't we have an increase of what we were paying them, our wastewater treatment plant? Horse Creek, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So now that we're not sending them as much, would we get anything back from that, or is it still pretty much the same rate?
No, our debt service payments were based on the capacity that we own. And so just because we're not utilizing that capacity, we do not receive a benefit.
Okay.
The only benefit we receive from decreased flow is a savings on monthly treatment costs from the county.
But it wouldn't offset what
It doesn't. It's not a one-for-one balance on revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. So what you have before you is the requested budget calendar. So today is obviously the 21st September, which is our first council study session. We have the ability to add a study session on next Monday, which is already a scheduled study session. So we can just add that as an agenda item if we needed more time for discussion and deliberation. And our intent is to be able to put out the public hearing notice of the budget for public comment starting on the 30th September. So we would need your input on any of the budget items by next week. And Cammie, is there a drop dead date we need from the council members to give us feedback? Is it Friday or Monday?
Friday would be preferable to give us time to finalize the budget and prepare the public notice. So the public notice is going to advertise the consolidated budget that will be at first reading. So that is what the public hearing will be held on. And were you to make any modifications during that meeting, it would go through an additional set of readings.
So you need any more feedback from us on what day, the 30th or the 1st? Next Thursday? Next Friday?
So we have to publish the notice in the
one.
paper on the 30th. So we would need it by this week.
This Friday?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Everybody good with that? Like Pat said, we changed it up a little bit without going item by line item, okay? Because we figure we're all responsible. So whatever's not discussed tonight, as you go through, you need to get this to them by Friday. Okay? Everybody good with that? Okay.
And from the council members, what I would request is if you have changes to the budget or if there are additions you want to put in the budget, I would request if you can propose what the sacrifice is, if you will. You're more interested in funding this, but not interested in funding that. That makes it easier for us to get consensus and balance the books.
Okay. Well, Rachel, Cammie, Jim, and all of the directors, thank you for your hard work to this point. So thank you for that. We said we got more work to do, but thank you to get us to this point. So anything else anybody has to say? All right. Thank you.